We started so strong with these Grotsmas detachments, but Grotsmas has been canceled. The Thousand Suns one's really bad. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and welcome back to another Grotsmas detachment breakdown. We're going through every single one of the new detachments that Warhammer 40k is releasing this month, talking about them, some strengths and weaknesses, building a list for them, and today we're talking about the Thousand Suns detachment Hexwarp Thrallband. As always, I'm going to keep doing these videos as long as people watch them, so if you like and shares, do all that stuff. I also have a playlist on my channel that is including all of these, so if you miss any days, you can go check them out there. Lastly, I plan to be live after this video goes live, playing with some of these new detachments over on my Twitch channel. It's twitch.tv/TacticalTortoiseTV. So if you're watching this day of release, you can head on over there. So let's talk about the Thrallband and exactly why it is such a disaster of a collection of rules. The flow of magic is its detachment rule. This is basically just a copy paste of the power matrix shadow chaos mechanics from other factions. As long as you control at least half of the objective markers in no man's land, at least half of the objective markers in your opponent's deployment zone, then that area is in your flow of magic. Your deployment zone is always inside your flow of magic, and your flow of magic gives you certain buffs when you're wholly within it. Each time a Thousand Suns model from your army makes a psychic attack, psychic only, you got a regular gun, that doesn't do anything. Cool. You get to reroll wound rolls of 1. If such a model is wholly within your army's flow of magic, it adds 1 to the wound roll instead. Not in addition, instead. So you trade rerolls for +1 to wound. Now, generally speaking, +1 to wound is better than rerolls, but the biggest and most centerpiece model of the faction, around which all of Thousand Suns have been designed, is Magnus the Red, who has an aura of +1 to wound. If you retained your reroll wound rolls of 1, in addition to having +1 to wound for Magnus, that'd be pretty cool. But you don't, though. It's one or the other. It's also important to note that this ability only triggers while your unit is wholly within your flow of magic. Now, fortunately, this is an effect that comes into play during your shooting phase or your fight phase, typically. So you're going to be able to aggressively move out and take objectives in your movement phase, then transfer control of the midboard to switch around the flow of magic. Then in your shooting phase, utilize that for +1 to wound. That's pretty cool. There is some weirdness, though. First of all, it's only if you're wholly within your flow of magic. So if you're touching your deployment zone, but you don't yet have flow of magic in the center of the table, if one model in your unit is a little bit outside your deployment zone, you lose that +1 to wound, which, I don't know, might be good for you if you want to keep retaining your wound rolls. I don't know. But all of the flow of magic effects check wholly within an area of the battlefield, and that's just obnoxious to have to keep track of. Oh, I have to make sure that my guys are behind this arbitrary line, because if anyone steps their pinky toe out of that line, then we lose our detachment ability. That's going to be obnoxious to play around. I don't know why it's wholly within, not within. So you're trying to move forward up the table to get this +1 to wound. It only affects your psychic weapons, and I think genuinely, which will come apparent as we read through the rest of the rules in this detachment, I think genuinely GW forgot, or maybe it's a thing that's coming in their codex, I don't know, or something like that, but there are no units with like unit-wide psychic attacks in Thousand Suns. Thousand Suns Psyker units are a bunch of regular dudes with regular guns that use regular mechanics, plus 1 Psyker with psychic weapons. So your detachment ability has you jump through all these hoops, stay wholly within an area, take all the objectives in the area that you're in, and then only affects your unit champion. And there are no ways to grant the psychic keyword to other weapons in this detachment. Unlike the regular detachment, this one doesn't do that. So your regular Rubric Marines, your regular Scarab Occult Terminators, the guys who aren't the sorcerer in the unit, don't get any benefit from your detachment ability. Now, as we move on, I think it's also important to note what exactly you're losing by moving out of the standard detachment. We talked about this with Death Guard. Because Thousand Suns are a mono detachment faction currently, you are losing what is arguably one of the most synergistic detachments in 40k, which is why this one I think seems so bad in comparison. While all of your Kabbalistic ritual mechanics remain the same, you're losing the keywords that are applied to psychic weapons that you choose at the start of each of your turns. So you can get sustained, lethal, or devastating wounds on all your psychic weapons, and that's gone in this detachment. You don't get that one anymore. In addition, you also lose things like the ability to fire your psychic weapons indirectly, getting full rerolls on your psychic weapons, applying psychic mechanics to regular weapons, to regular bolters, which basically single-handedly makes bolter rubrics and Scarab Coil Terminators playable. All that stuff is gone. So the comparison already looks bad, but I think because of this dearth of psychic attacks inside regular models in the faction, I think that this would be horrible regardless of whether or not they were losing an existing detachment. If this was Thousand Sun's only detachment that they had access to, the faction would be not good. Certainly not as good as they have been in the past. Genuinely, I think if this detachment ability affected all the models in your army, if you got reroll wound rolls of 1, so you weren't contingent on playing Rubric Brains to get your rerolls, and you could then transfer that over into a wound bonus, so it could affect things like your vehicles and stuff, I think this would probably be in a conversation, but as it stands, there's so few models that actually benefit from your detachment ability. It's crazy. So let's move over to the enhancements. I think on the surface, the enhancements in this detachment look pretty good until you start to realize that a lot of them require you to be wholly within your flow of magic. That's another probably issue with the detachment. Thousand Suns are not a particularly aggressive army. They don't have that many models because everything's really expensive because the existing detachment's really good, so they got super upcharged. So the detachment's asking you to push your army super duper far forward to benefit from your detachment roll with models that are already kind of expensive you don't really want to do. So I don't know about that. We'll see. The first enhancement is Arcane Might. This gives you +1 to the strength characteristic of psychic weapons in the bearer's unit. Again, literally just a character and like the sorcerer in there. The other models don't benefit at all. While you're wholly within your flow of magic, you get +2 to the strength characteristic instead. Cool, man. All right, my Warp Smite, my devastating anti-infantry weapon, goes up to strength 6. Woo, let's go, dude.
This affects your melee stuff, so you might be able to use it to push like a demon prince to strength 10, I guess. So maybe could be good, but again, you gotta be in your flow of magic, so it only works sometimes.
Empowered Manifestation. While the bearer's unit is wholly within your army's flow of magic, add 6 to the range of psychic abilities the bearer has that specify a range, including rituals. And each time the model in the bearer's unit takes a hazardous test for a psychic weapon, you can reroll the result. The most interesting place for this enhancement, I think, is the Terminator Sorcerer. It has an 18-inch range psychic ability that gives you reroll hit rolls of 1. So you can potentially be getting hit and wound rerolls of 1 thanks to the detachment ability on a particular thing. That could be cute, although that guy doesn't have any hazardous weapons, so the second part of the enhancement doesn't do anything. I believe that the Demon Prince's auras are also affected, so you can use his Weave of Fate and Glamour of Tzeentch on things farther away. Other than that, though, I don't think anything has datasheet abilities that specify a range. Most stuff is leadership effects. However, this does include your rituals, so you're getting additional distance on your rituals, which is kind of cool, although you don't have any way to double ritual in this detachment, so I don't know how ritual dependent you're going to be. Empiric Onslaught is the next one. While you're wholly within your flow of magic, add 3 to the attack characteristic of ranged psychic weapons equipped by the bearer. This one actually is legitimately, I think, pretty good. +3 attacks is just solid, especially if you get some high value ones. I think that Terminator Sorcerer, again, might be a pretty good spot for this. That guy's got a 2 damage anti-monster, anti-vehicle devastating gun. So that could be pretty cool. Again, it requires you to be wholly within your flow of magics. But maybe if you're playing like singleton Terminator Sorcerers or something, then you can like squeak into the corners. I don't know. A Noctilith Mantle is the last one. This one's baffling to me. While the bearer's unit's on the battlefield, it is wholly within your army's flow of magic. Cool, you can get +1 to wound. Although there's no double attachment in Thousand Suns. Nobody can attach 2 characters together. So you can't, for example, combo this with Empiric Onslaught to make sure you always get your +3 psychic attacks. So that kind of sucks. In addition, models in the unit cannot be selected to use any rituals. And there goes all the wind in my sails. I think the biggest use case of this is placing units out of reserve or something in the back of your opponent's deployment zone, trying to push them forward and push the board presence of your army forward and put them in positions where they wouldn't normally be inside flow of magic. However, those units typically require rituals. Otherwise, you have a move 5 rubric unit that's just chilling and awkwardly wandering around. And not being able to, for example, temporal surge yourself after reserving in your opponent's backline is not good. You'd need another unit to come temporal surge them, which is tough. It feels to me like they want you to play like a ton of independent characters, maybe? I'm not sure. But the independent characters are also really bad at taking objectives. So I don't know. Let's talk about some stratagems. Warding Hex is an obsec stratagem. It locks in an objective under your control in your command phase if you control it with a Psyker unit. Unfortunately, you can't do this with things like Zangor Enlightened or standard Zangors. Those are non-Psykers unless they have a Shaman attached. So that's unfortunate.
I think it's also important to mention that this requires that the objective is wholly within your flow of magic. So in order to lock like a forward objective in the center of the table, you have to control most of the objectives in the center. So you have to control more than just the objective that you're standing on in order for this stratagem to work. Kind of a mess, to be honest, unless you just want to use it on your backline objective, which is fine, I guess.
Wrath of the Doomed is the next one. After an enemy unit has selected its targets, you use it in the fight phase after an enemy unit has selected its targets. It gives you a 4+ fight on death, adding 1 to the result if your army is wholly within your army's flow of magic. So I think they are trying to maybe push a Terminator thing here. Terminators are the only real melee infantry that Thousand Suns have. You can use this on Zangor, so that's like pretty good at fighting against other people's infantry sweepers potentially. But there is some sort of inherent anti-synergy with running the Terminators as well. And not to mention the fact that, Terminators I think are just run better by the initial detachment by Cult of Magic. Strands of Time is the next one. This one, unironically, is really good for Thousand Suns. So I don't want to say that it's all 100% bad in this detachment. There is some good stuff. Strands of Time allows you to fall back, shoot, or charge when you fall back, if you are wholly within your flow of magic when you are targeted by the stratagem, then you get both. That's a little bit awkward because you can't determine whether or not the flow of magic is active when you fall back. Typically, that's like going to be in the center of the battlefield. So if you have Magnus engaged, for example, and your opponent takes 2 out of the 3 objectives in the middle, then in your movement phase, you haven't had enough time to take them back. So Magnus will only be able to fall back, shoot, or charge. Your opponent gets a lot of control over essentially when you can use this effect. However, it's still good to have because this is not something that Thousand Suns have ever had before. Previously in Cult of Magic, they were basically just trying to shoot themselves out of melee or doombolt themselves out of melee if they did get stuck in, and you could set up situations where Magnus, for example, was engaging 2 units and didn't have enough pre-movement phase damage output to kill both of them, so he was arbitrarily locked in combat, and then he would get stuck and your 450 point superhero would not be able to operate. That was a big weakness of Cult of Magic. Obviously, it's nice to have some mitigation for that. Next up is another cool one, Through the Veil. You use it at the start of your reinforcements step of your movement phase. You can't use it off of Rapid Ingress, important to note. You target a Rubric Marine unit or a Scarab Occult unit that's in Strategic Reserves. If you targeted a Rubric unit, it gains Deep Strike. If you targeted a Scarab Occult Terminator unit, who already has Deep Strike, you can set that unit up 6 inches away from enemy units if you are wholly within your army's flow of magic. Again, this is in the movement phase, so you haven't had the opportunity to move up and take objectives to expand your flow of magic. So honestly, probably not that useful. The kicker here is that if you are a Scarab Occult unit, you cannot declare a charge after deep striking this way. Oh man, you couldn't even give him one thing. The detachment, I'm dying right now. The detachment is incentivizing you to get your Rubric Marines and your Scarab Occult Terminators into melee. You have to take objectives to flip flow of magic, and you have a fight on death. Why are we then restricting Scarab Occult Terminators from close deep striking and charging? That would at least be something that they could do. Instead, I guess you could deep strike and then move on to an objective and take it from your opponent with Temporal Surge. Although, like, the Temporal Surge doesn't even recalculate level of control until the end of the phase. So you still don't have the objective. Even if you 6-inch deep strike a Scarab Occult Terminator unit, somehow get it wholly within your flow of magic, and then move on to a new objective, you still don't have that objective until the end of the phase, which is good for Rubric Marines, but bad if you want to get your flow of magic effects. This attachment doesn't do anything. It's incredible. Scouring Warp Flame is the next one. You use it on a Psyker unit that has not been selected to shoot and is wholly within your flow of magic. Why does it have to be wholly within your flow of magic? We literally just saw this stratagem in Tyranids of all factions. Tyranids have a better version of this. Are you kidding me? Until the end of the phase, ranged weapons equipped by models of the unit have ignore cover. After a unit has shot this phase, select when enemy unit hits by 1 or more of the attacks. Until the end of the phase, models of the unit cannot benefit from cover. I mean, it's pretty good. To be fair, most of the time you're shooting people with flamers anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But stripping cover with Psyker units is sweet. The downside is that wholly within flow of magic requirement. Kaleidoscopic Tempest is the next one. Use it in your opponent's shooting phase after an enemy unit has selected its targets. You target 1,000 Suns Psyker unit. Couldn't use this on Zangors. No. They get stealth, and if you are wholly within flow of magic, you get cover. I mean, that's nice. At least we have some defensive strats to use on Rubric Marines sometimes. That's good. So I'm being very pessimistic about this detachment. And here's, I think, the real crux of the issue is that a lot of these stratagems we're looking at, especially things like Through the Veil, giving Rubric Marines Deep Strike is unironically good. And giving them things like Fall Back and Shoot with Strands of Time is also good. Most of these require Psyker units. So you are already in the faction where your previous detachment was already entirely predicated on playing Psykers with psychic weapons to get all of your abilities and trigger all of your stratagems. You're then applying on top of that a second detachment where everything requires you to be a Psyker unit. So there's no incentive at all to change your mode of play. So if I wanted to play a Psyker-focused Thousand Suns army, which to be fair, every Thousand Suns army is going to be regardless of what exactly I put into it, because most of the faction is Psychic. If I wanted to focus on the Psychic characters in the Rubric Marines, there would be no reason to play this detachment because I already have a detachment that does all the same stuff. The only unique stuff is the ability to deep strike your rubrics and to fall back and shoot them. But I don't think that's enough to incentivize somebody to play this over an already extremely powerful detachment. I've turned my lights off. We're running a Black Hat now because we're going kind of renegade. I was originally going to do like a bit where I was just going to be like, hey, play a normal Thousand Suns list because this is just a worse version of the Cult of Magic detachment. But I think we should add some creativity into this video and try to make this detachment work. And I think that the intention of the detachment is that we try to play it without Magnus the Red. So we're building a non-Magnus Thousand Suns list. He doesn't have the same level of support as he does in Cult of Magic, so we're going to leave him at home. He doesn't have blank damage. He doesn't have his full rerolls. He doesn't have extended range. All that stuff is gone. So we're not force multiplying one single model. We're trying to build a list that is a little bit more widespread. So we're building kind of a rubric horde in order to try to push aggressively and take objectives and be able to flip them and use the flow of magic mechanics. So with that in mind, I've built in a bunch of units that don't necessarily need the Cult of Magic detachment ability, meaning that they have devastating wounds on their weapons already. So we have 3 Exalted Sorcerers. They already have devastating wounds, and they buff their rubrics to make them more resilient, so that's good. We also then have 2 Infernal Masters because they're just good. I don't know. They don't have devastating wounds, so the Glimpse of Eternity is not quite as stupid as it is in the other detachments. However, they're good. They're still a good unit, so you just take them. Now, the interesting thing is that we are playing around with Demon Princes. Without Magnus, we need a little bit of an anchor, and I do think that the detachment abilities actually affect Demon Princes fairly well. Getting +1 to wound into Demon Prince is a really big deal because that puts their relatively low strength melee attack to being pretty good. So they can act as, while they are low AP, they can act as a little bit of a backline counterpunch. So we've got 2 Demon Princes in here. One of them is the standard foot Demon Prince. So he broadcasts his stealth aura, and he has that once per game, like weird precision effects, which we're probably not going to use. But we're taking the enhancement on him to extend the range of all of his abilities. So assuming it works this way, which I believe it does, that will extend the range of his stealth aura from 6 inches up to 12 inches. So he's broadcasting a huge radius of stealth for all these little units that we're going to be running around the table with and trying to do funky stuff with. That seems pretty cool. In addition, as long as he's like moving up and in the charge phase, you can take objectives with him and your rubrics, and then he'll get his +1 to wound in melee. On top of that, we have a Winged Demon Prince. We're taking the Noctilith mantle on him so that he gets permanent flow of magic all the time. Again, we're proxying some enhancements here. These don't say the right thing, but that's because we don't have the new detachment in new recruit yet, but that's okay. So he has an uppy downy. He can deep strike, so he can play really aggressively, and we can sort of bounce him to the enemy deployment zone. We can bounce him around. The Demon Prince himself gets an extended range of his rituals, so if we need to double move that dude or something, we can use it on that guy. But he's going to be getting that +1 to wound with his melee attacks all the time, regardless of where he's going. So we can use him to sort of fight in the enemy deployment zone and be a big dingus over there. He does a little mortal wound bombing stuff. That all seems pretty cool. That's kind of the experimental part of the list. We also then have a Terminator Sorcerer. As I mentioned before, I think that the extra attack, the +3 attack enhancement is really good on this guy. You put his devastating weapon, his anti-vehicle devastating weapon up to 6 shots. So he has the potential to just like plow somebody for 12 damage. He probably won't. He'll probably do 4 to 6 damage, but that all by itself is pretty good. And then from there, we have, what is this? 30 Rubric Marines, a big unit of 10, and then 4 units of 5 to attach the characters into. So we can attach the Infernal Masters and the Exalted Sorcerers in there, buff them up with the Foot Demon Prince to keep the big bricks harder to kill. We have a 10-man here that can get a 4+ invulnerable save from an Arcane Shield. And then we have 2 little 5s that will also be doing that. It's relatively tanky. I don't want to say that Rubric Marines are super tough to take down, but they are... I don't know. They can be a little bit dicey to kill. And if we need to as well, we can use the Deep Strike ability on these guys. We can potentially even like Deep Strike the big Rubric Marine squad and then double move it onto an objective, which is potentially a lot of, you know, kind of aggressive push. And if they're outside of the Demon Prince's aura, we do have that stratagem for -1 to be hit as well for ranged attacks. We then also have 3 units of Chaos Cultists and a Zangor Enlightened unit for utility. These guys, I think, are going to be doing a lot of the legwork, flipping objectives in the early game. The Cultists have Scout. They're really good. They'll generate us some CPU we can use our incredible abilities with. And they're going to be able to, hopefully, when we are looking for that +1 to wound on our devastating guns, because they're already going to be getting rerolls from the Rubric units, so we don't really care. So if we're shooting all these, you know, Infernal Master shots and these Exalted Sorcerer shots downrange, getting +1 to wound on all of those everywhere is going to be great. And if we can use the Cultists to do that and send them in under the stealth aura before the Rubric Marines have to commit, that lets us stay a little bit more defensive with the Rubric Marines and keep them safe. And then we have a Rhino as well that we can also use to deliver them the Rubric Marines too. I don't think that this list in particular, because it doesn't have like a Lord of Forbidden Lore, for example, and there's no way to duplicate your rituals. I don't think it's going to be as contingent on Cabal points as other detachments. I do think that without Devastating Wounds on most of its attacks, you're probably going to be leaning on Twist of Fate a lot more often. So that's where their Cabal points are going to be going in a lot of situations. But I have a sneaking suspicion that we're not going to be quite as worried about Cabal points on the table as much. So being able to put dudes into Rhinos for round 1 or so and get them up the table and fighting enemy utility units, I think is going to be a really good use of our time there. So that's what I have put together for the Hexwarp Thrallband. Like I mentioned a million times, I don't think it's as good as Cult of Magic, not even close. I don't even think it's particularly interesting compared to Cult of Magic, but I do think maybe there's some stuff here if you can sort of make the powerful melee weapons work with +1 to wound, stuff like that. Hopefully that works out okay. I just wish that the detachment abilities were a little bit more broadly applied so we can put them on stuff like vehicles and other units in order to make use of those. But in this case, we're playing another version of Cult of Magic, but we don't have a Magnus, I guess, so doesn't seem as good. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up the video. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. Thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing. I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.